My friends, I just pressed the Let's Go Live button, so let's wait for the stream to fire up all across the fruited plains of the internet. You can see we're broadcasting from another location now. Let's make sure that we're alive and well. Let's make sure that the stream is functional all across the fruited plains of the internet. You can see we're broadcasting from I need to turn that off. We have a little bit of that we're alive and well. Let's make sure that the stream is functional all across the fruited plains of the internet. You can see we're broadcasting from I need to turn that off. We have a little bit of that we're alive and well. Let's make sure that the stream is functional all across the fruited plains of the internet. You can see we're broadcasting from I need to turn that off. We have a little bit of that we're alive and well. Let's make sure that the stream is functional all across the fruited plains of the internet. You can see we're broadcasting from I need to turn that off. We have a little bit of that we're alive and well. Let's make sure that the stream is functional all across the fruited plains of the internet. You can see we're broadcasting from I need to turn that off. What the heck is going on over here? Alive and well. Let's make sure the stream is functional all across the fruited plains of the internet. You can see we're broadcasting from I need to turn that off. What the heck is going on over here? Alive and well. Let's make sure the stream is functional all across the fruited plains of the There it is. I found the rogue tab. Oh my goodness. All right. We had a loop going on there, a bad audio loop. So let me make sure that we're doing okay now because we were hearing a lot of interference there. So I've got to open up a couple different streams. Sorry, everybody. You know, I'm an amateur. It's showing very clearly. We're here in a hotel room in Arlington, and I'm trying to figure out how to get all of this functional. Now, I want to make sure that I can see everybody. I can see the live chat. And so I'm going to need to open up a couple screens because I just freaked out and shut everything down. Let's make sure that I can see. There it is. We're over on locals. I see George Klaus in the house, Joshua Schaub. I've got Paula MK. Let me know, make sure you can hear me loud and clear. So let me hear that in the chat just to make sure that things are working well. And then, of course, over on YouTube, we've got Greg in Houston. We've got Anything Goes. Just Cows is in the house. They're telling me that the hotel Wi-Fi is killing me, and that is true. You know, part of the problem here today is that the Dallas Cowboys are playing tonight, and so this hotel is packed full. So everybody is probably on the internet. Bandwidth on the hotel is 2 megabytes per second. They're telling me it's killing me. All right, you're good. Just laggy as hell. All right, so I apologize for that. We're going to go ahead and do the show anyways. We're going to try to stream through this, and then I'll see if I can figure out some of the lag. But what we're going to do is we're going to record it, and so we'll be able to upload those additional segments later on the different channel, which is the clips channel. And so they're telling me that it's freezing up every 10 seconds, which is just outstanding. So that's not any good. Let's see if there's anything I can do about that. I can see if I can maybe adjust the stream setting, turn the quality down a little bit. Let me see if I can adjust the output here while we get this functioning. Nope, can't change that while we're live. And so I can't adjust the bit rate. I can't do anything. 2 thumbs up on the audio looks good, so that's great. All right, well, you know, I'm trying to debate whether I should do the show or not because we're cutting out quite a bit. And it's looking like another show very well may be canceled. So how about we just take a look and see what's going on. 2 thumbs up from the audio. I'm still seeing some of the chats coming in. Yeah, everybody's telling me it just keeps freezing. Oh, darn it. All right. So here's maybe what I'll do, folks. I will go ahead and I will record these segments, and then I will upload them onto the separate clips channel. And so right now what we're seeing is, so I really can't switch to Wi-Fi, or to my 5G, can I? In the middle of a stream, probably not. All right, so here's what I'll do. I'm going to go ahead and we'll stop the live stream. I'm going to record all the content, and then we're going to go ahead and upload the content over to, wait, hold on. Paula says just do the show. All right, well, All right, we're just going to do the show and we're going to see what happens here. So I am checking my internet. It's looking good. We're just going to go ahead and do the show and then we'll record it at a later time. All right, my friends. Hello and welcome back to yet another episode of Wi-Fi Cheapo Hotel Room at the Sheraton in Arlington, Texas, where we're talking about a lot of things today. Watching the Watchers Live is the show that we do. So we'll do the regular standard intro. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Grueller. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have represented thousands of good people facing criminal charges. And throughout our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with our justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We've got judges not particularly interested in a little thing called justice, and it all starts with the politicians, the people at the top, the ones who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and me to follow, but sometimes have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. That's why we started this show called Watching the Watchers, so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. And we're grateful that you are here and with us today. Apologies on the Wi-Fi. I did a stream a couple days ago over on Locals, and it seemed like it was working okay. But as I mentioned, I'm here in Arlington. Today is Monday night. The Dallas Cowboys are playing the Philadelphia Eagles. Our hotel is literally like a stone's throw away from the new Dallas Cowboys Stadium. And so the hotel is just jam-packed. Everybody is coming in here. And so I'm going to guess that the Wi-Fi is a little bit under some strain here today. And of course, it's amateur hour over here on YouTube. So I don't have a separate Wi-Fi internet puck. Although tomorrow I could turn my phone into a hotspot. We could see if that works, which is another idea. So I'll go ahead and try that, my friends. But we've got some things to get into today. It's going to be a little bit of a shorter show because we do have an event later this evening with our organization. So we're actually, several of us are going to actually go over to the game later in the evening. And so we're going to go check that out. Not that I'm a particular big sports fan, but you know, when in Rome, they say you go and you go do those things. And so we're going to go socialize a little bit and spend some time, but we've got some business to attend to here on the show. And so we're going to be talking about a couple different things. First and foremost, we're going to jump into the booster shot because President Biden just came out today and got his third shot. He got boosted up. Went to the nurse. She rolled up the sleeve and just jabbed that puppy right in there. And so we got to talk a little bit about that because the vaccine mandates are rolling out across the country, and there are going to be some pretty serious consequences that happen as a result of that. So we're going to talk about vaccines and some of the booster stuff that is happening. Then we're going to change gears and talk about the Arizona audit that finished up last week on Friday. And I want to go through that in a little bit of detail. Not going to spend much time talking about the nuts and bolts that were actually taking place in the middle of the audit. We know there's a ton of data, 3 hours of data that was percolating around there during the press conference. And so we're going to take a look at what happened there. But I want to frame this out in a little bit different format. I want to talk about it in the context of burdens of proof and the issues. Some of the legal analysis that we do here on the show, we can apply that to the Arizona audit. It doesn't need to be something where it's just sort of everybody's just shooting from the hip, where they just get to go in and decide whether or not it feels right. It feels like Arizona maybe had a problem with the election, or it feels like Trump actually won. Well, what we need to do there is talk about the different standards and what are the standards that we're going to be applying to the election and what is the burden of proof and who has to prove it. Is it the government that has to prove that the election was valid, or is this something that once the government decides it was valid, that the people who were challenging the actual election, are they the people that then have the burden of proof? Did they have to come in and show something different? And so we're going to play around with some of those concepts here today. And then in our final segment, we're going to talk about some new FBI numbers. FBI came out and they're telling us that the murder rates in the United States of America are up rather dramatically. And so we're going to take a look at this new report, and we're also going to take a look at what I've been doing here for the last 3 days. I got here last week. We spent a ton of time over at the Arlington Chemistry Lab taking a look at some very cool stuff. And I've got some pictures and some photographs that I want to share with you, but it's only for non-prosecutors. It's only for non-law enforcement people. So if you happen to be one of those, you're not allowed to watch the last segment because it's some behind the scenes stuff. And so we're going to get into all of that and more. Let's make sure that I've got my slides pulled up over here so that we can get into the news of the day. Before we get there, quick reminder, if you are over on Locals, we have this form, which I believe I have up. Let me take a look at there it is. I'm working with limited screens here. So we've got this form, which you can use to submit questions if you are over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And we're going to do everything we can to get to your questions here today. So we also have a clips channel. So if the audio, the video is bad, you're going to be able to see these reposted, everything we talk about over on Robert Gruller ESQ/clips because our Wi-Fi is garbage. So I apologize for that. But let's get into the news of the day, shall we? All right. So starting off, Joe Biden got his third booster shot, and he really wants the rest of America to get it. And we've been seeing a lot of back and forth with the Biden administration saying that this was something that was going to be available back on September 20th. Well, September 27th, FDA, CDC, Rochelle Walensky, everybody's trying to figure out what to do about these boosters. You've got Moderna, Pfizer, a lot of different drug manufacturers are out there talking about this and just really getting excited about the idea that all Americans are going to have to get a third shot, maybe a fourth shot, maybe a fifth shot. We don't know yet, but it is still rolling out. We also know that previously Joe Biden had said that vaccine mandates are now part of America. So I don't know what constitutional provision he is leaning on, probably because he's not. He's using an obscure OSHA standard that has really rarely been enforced in order to try to cram these vaccine mandates down everybody's gullet. And it's looking like he's being somewhat successful with this. A lot of different states, regardless of where this falls constitutionally speaking, are now doing the same thing. And we're going to see what this is doing to the different markets around the world. We're going to visit New York, we're going to visit Boston, and see what some of these vaccine mandates are doing with nurses, with healthcare workers, what they're doing to different police officers and things like that. But before we get into it, let's see what Joe Biden was doing today. Here is Joe. He was over getting his third booster, and here is what that sounded like.
Or countries without vaccinations get vaccinated before they get boosters here in America.
We are helping. We're doing more than every other nation in the world combined. We're going to have well over 1,100,000,000 shots, and we're going to continue going. We're going to do our part. We've also given a great deal of funding to COVAX, which is the vehicle that does this. So we have plenty of opportunity to make sure we get everyone in the world to play our part, the largest part in the world of getting everyone vaccinated.
How many Americans need to be vaccinated for us to go back to normal? Like, what is the percentage of total vaccinations that have to be deployed?
Well, I think, look.
Okay, so we've got Joe Biden now, double vaxxed, now triple vaxxed, and he's still masked up. What the heck is that all about? So apparently the boosters are, well, I guess we'll see if he continues to wear the mask. We know that at the moment in the video that we just watched, he was only semi-vaxxed, according to him and his White House standards now. He only had 2 boosters. Maybe that's only 2 shots. Maybe that's why he had the mask on. But now he's got his third one. So once that puppy kicks in, can we expect the mask to finally go away? Or is this something that they're going to continue to milk indefinitely? I think we all know where that's going. All of the COVID restrictions that we all thought were going to be around for 15 days, not so fast. They seem to be sticking around indefinitely, just like everything else that the government touches. When there is a little bit of a crisis, they go in there, expand their power so that they can continue to gobble it up. And once they have it, they're very reticent to give that up. So that's Joe Biden. Now he is unrolling his booster vaccine mandate program. All of these different COVID protocols are continuing to roll out, and there are consequences for this. People don't want to be mandated to go and get the vaccine. I posted a Twitter thread earlier today that we'll read here in a little bit, but I want to show you some of the consequences of this government action. First thing we're going to start off with is taking a look at dozens of Massachusetts state police troopers who are now resigning over the COVID vaccine mandate. The union is saying that they're out of here. The State Police Association of Massachusetts said dozens of troopers have submitted their resignation papers as a result of the state's COVID mandates. Let's get this laser pointer on over here. The state is requiring all executive department employees to show proof of vaccination by October 17th or risk losing their jobs. That's coming up right now. About 20% of state police employees are not vaccinated. And so we're going to see what happened here. But last week, there was a judge who denied a request from the state police union to put a hold on Baker's vaccine mandate for the various troopers. The union came out, released a statement, and said, guys, throughout COVID, we have been on the front lines protecting the citizens of Massachusetts and beyond. Simply put, all we are asking for are the same basic accommodations that countless other departments have provided to their first responders, and to treat a COVID-related illness as a line of duty injury. To date, dozens of troopers have already submitted their resignation paperwork, some of whom plan to return to other departments offering reasonable alternatives such as mask wearing and regular testing. State police are already critically short-staffed and acknowledge this by the unprecedented moves which took troopers from specialty units that investigate various crimes like homicides, terrorism, computer crimes, arsons, gangs, narcotics, human trafficking, return them to uniform patrol. And so we're going to see this. We're not going to cover it in this segment, but the FBI came out today. They released a bunch of new numbers telling us specifically homicide rates are going up, murder going up across the board, and that crime in general in the United States seems like it's picking up, which of course is to be expected when you have an entire political party that's talking about defunding the police. We just went through 2020 where there was the summer of unrest that the media and the Democratic Party was milking to the end of the earth in order to hurt Donald Trump. Racism, white supremacy, defund the police everywhere you turn. Lo and behold, police don't want to work under those conditions. They don't like that. When Portland comes out, or Seattle, or I think it was Washington State came out and said that they have to essentially be, cough break, they came out and said specifically that the police department had to sort of act as pseudo critical race theory, anti-patriarchal, white supremacist, wokesters. I don't know what the official term was, but obviously that's an impossible standard to meet. Even the governor over there is having a difficult time doing that. So by mandating that you want police to serve and protect, you want them to go out there and accomplish things like fighting crime and protecting society, when you have an entire government body, not to mention an entire political party that spans across states throughout the entire nation, sort of poo-pooing their efforts, that's going to be a problem. Why would they continue to work there? They wouldn't. And they're not. In addition to what happened last year, now we have vaccine mandates saying that you have to go do this if you want to continue to be a part of our society. And the police are saying, no, we're not going to do it. And I think that's a very, very serious thing that's happening. We have to be very cognizant of this. Okay, these are not people who are working at a McDonald's, right? Where it's very fungible, where they just pick up and move and go do other things. This is something that requires some training to be a police officer. Many of them have started to pay into pensions. Many of them have made the decision to make this job, to make this career their entire lives, right? 20, 30, 40 years. I've met officers who've been around longer than I've been alive. And that's because they're dedicated to their work. Now we have bureaucrats who are coming out and telling them that we don't care about your medical history. We don't care about your religious exemptions. We don't care about providing you any escape hatches with testing or with masking or any of those things. You get the shot or you're gone. And that means that people who have invested their entire lives into this now have to make a very serious decision. Do they stand on the side of liberty and freedom and personal choice and self-autonomy, or do they just bend the knee and go and get the vaccine because some bureaucrat mandated it? It's a really tough decision to make. And I'm sure that most people are taking the latter option. Why? Because they've got families to provide for. They've got mortgages to pay. They've got kids that are relying on them putting food on the table. And so they don't get those options, really. to really have that financial freedom that would empower them to make a decision to stand on the side of liberty. Instead, they have to just survive because our government has put them in that position. It's a disgusting thing. And so my hats go off to these troopers who were saying, you know what? We're going to take the hard road. It would be very easy for them to just go down there and just say, all right, enough already. I'm tired of fighting it. I can empathize with them because, quite frankly, I get graded on this stuff. I get tired of everywhere we go. In this hotel here today, they've got signs all over the place. If you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. If you're unvaccinated, you've got to wear a mask. And so they're already creating these two separate tiers of systems. Here in Texas, folks, this is not like we're living in Los Angeles here today. This is in Texas, and this is happening across the board. So it is something that we're starting to see trickle out everywhere. A select few people are standing up and putting their foot down and saying, look, I know it's going to hurt me financially. I know it's going to hurt my career, but this is the right thing to do because the government should not be mandating that we put certain things in our body. So hats off to these troopers. They're over from Massachusetts and they're making a very hard decision. Now, it's not just happening to police. It's happening elsewhere. In New York, you may recall, when we used to have creepy Cuomo over there, he's no longer in office. Now we have a new governor. Her name is Kathy Hochul. And we've talked a lot about New York, saying that largely this has sort of been the canary in the coal mine. This has been where a lot of the lockdown started, the mask mandate started, the Vax Pass started in New York City, and now it's been spreading around with its disgusting tentacles throughout the rest of the country. Landed over in San Francisco and LA, in other different parts of the country, we're seeing it roll out day by day. And now what's happening is that other industries are saying, we don't want any part of that. Just like the Boston police said, we're out of here. Different individuals in different sectors are now saying the same thing. And so in New York now, they're thinking about bringing in the National Guard to replace all of the unvaxxed healthcare workers that are leaving. That's right. If you were watching what was happening in Australia, and we haven't been able to talk much about it because the video footage coming out of Australia is so insane that we can't even play it on this channel. YouTube would describe it as being 18 plus, police brutality, all of that stuff. And they would basically, force us to delete the video. It's complicated, the rules on how that works, but it is not something that is even fit for YouTube consumption. But if you see what's going on over in Australia, the police are basically enacting martial law. They are beating old people up, senior citizens, people who are just protesting this. They are doing everything they can to make themselves look like a little dictatorship over there. They're rolling out the military. They're bringing police in full riot gear to come and beat up grandma and grandpa in the name of saving grandma and grandpa. So they're saying that they're going to go out there and care about your health, care about your life, care about your well-being as they are beating you to the ground and then pepper spraying you and macing you in the face. Not particularly focused on health as far as I can tell, but I'm not from Australia. I don't know how they do things. Maybe a nice can of mace clears out the sinuses and helps you, not get COVID or something. I don't know. I doubt it. But that's what they're doing over there. So now we're seeing this start to roll out in the United States. The National Stinking Guard is coming out to respond to COVID. Reuters reported this September 26, says that the New York may tap the National Guard to replace unvaccinated healthcare workers. New York Governor Kathy Hochul is considering employing the National Guard and out-of-state medical workers to fill hospital staffing shortages with tens of thousands of workers. Now possibly losing their jobs for not meeting a Monday deadline, which mandated COVID-19 vaccinations. That deadline is today. The plan, outlined in a statement from Hochul on Saturday, would allow her workers to declare a state of emergency to increase the supply of healthcare workers, to include licensed professionals from other states and other countries. Or, you just don't have to impose the mandate and they won't leave. Just an idea, but they're not going to do that because they've already made their bed. Now they're going to sleep in it. So while New York Governor Kathy Hochul is essentially single-handedly wrecking her healthcare system by encouraging a number of the unvaxxed to leave, now has to bring in the military to go deal with it. And so if you were watching Australia and thinking, this can't happen here, it's happening right here. The military is coming in here to deal with the COVID response. Do you think it's going to stop there? Just having them treating people in hospital beds? No. That's how it started elsewhere. And now what we see are lunatic police officers from Australia going and beating up grandma and grandpa. Hochul said the state was also looking at using the National Guard with medical training to keep hospitals and other medical facilities adequately staffed. Some 16% of the state's 450,000 hospital staff, or 72,000 workers, have not been fully vaccinated, the governor said. 72,000 people. Today was the deadline. Now they have another deadline. I think it's 72,000 if you're in a hospital, or after that, it's everybody else. That's the October deadline that is coming up. So 72,000 people now are going to be subject to termination. This is according to Reuters in New York, in the middle of a pandemic. And we know that things are getting worse. We know that they're sort of expecting that a lot of this is going to ramp up into the winter months, not necessarily COVID, but because we've got flu season and cold season and everybody gets sick in the winter in the United States. Now we're going to be dealing with COVID plus everything else. Dr. Scott Gottlieb has talked a lot about this, saying specifically, we got to deal with the flu and COVID indefinitely. How are you going to do that when 16% of your staff is going away? We're already in the middle of basically an unemployment crisis. There's a ton of people who are unemployed but don't want to work. A lot of businesses are having problems finding people to work. You can't go to a restaurant and get good service anywhere. Can't get it in Arizona, can't get it in Texas. And I know it's different, right? Nurses and healthcare workers are not necessarily servers, but it's the same concept. Huge shortages of employees, and our healthcare system, you might think, would be the first one that we protect. We carve out exclusions for those people. You incentivize people to come in and participate in the healthcare system by incentivizing them. We had a problem last year with not having enough healthcare workers. Remember that? And now we're going to do stuff to get rid of 72,000 of them in New York. It's going to be a big problem. Here is Governor Hochul talking about this. She came out and said, full steam ahead. This is what we're doing. So get on board. Here's Hochul.
And we'll be nation leading with our mandate, which strikes at midnight tonight, when everyone is expected in a hospital in the state of New York or a healthcare facility to have been vaccinated. I will be signing an executive order to give me the emergency powers necessary to address these shortages where they occur. And that's going to allow me to deploy the National Guard, who are medically trained, deploy people who've been retired, who may have had a license lapse, bring in people from elsewhere. That is not my first position, though, my friends. My desire is to have the people who've been out there continue to work in their jobs, work in them safely, and to all the other healthcare workers who are vaccinated, they also deserve to know that the people they're working with will not get them sick.
The people that they're working with will not get them sick, which is so insane because they've been telling us for the last 9 months that all the vaccines were great. They're great. They stop you from getting sick. Now it's the vaccinated that are highly concerned about catching the virus. You're going, oh, what? I thought that's the whole reason you got the vaccine in the first place. And so, of course, she comes out with, well, we prefer if everybody just went and got it. They know that they're not, and they're making rules that are going to necessarily cause those people to leave. She's causing her own crisis, her own healthcare crisis. And I'm sure she's not a dumb person. I'm sure she knows what's going to happen, and she's got a solution. Isn't it convenient? Oh, it's just the military. We're just going to bring in the National Guard. No problem at all. They're going to be able to come in. They're going to set up shop. We don't need any of those other healthcare workers anyways. Goodbye and good luck. Sorry about your job, but you didn't do what we asked you to do. And so now you're on your own. So that's Governor Hochul over in New York. And she's just, going to set the template for all of the other states as this continues to unroll. So now you know what the solution is. Now you know if there are people like the police who are going to say, we're out of here. We're not doing it. Or there are nurses. We're out of here. Sorry. The government has a solution. Armed soldiers, National Guard, and we'll see what happens next. So that is rolling out. A little bit more background on what's happening in New York. 15 New York healthcare workers, 1,500 go to court to stop the vaccine mandate. So Liberty Counsel, they filed a lawsuit on behalf of 1,500 of those workers. The We've got some deadlines coming up. This is taking place out of the Federal Eastern District Court of New York. Plaintiffs are standing up against the state's attempt to ignore federal law and remove religious exemptions and accommodations from COVID shot mandates for healthcare workers. None of the plaintiffs have lost their jobs pending this lawsuit. One was previously fired, has been reinstated. Yeah, because it's discrimination. It's religious discrimination when the courts get their hands on this. Liberty Counsel filed a supplemental authority, in this case, after the New York granted a temporary restraining order for all healthcare workers in the state. The mandatory policy applies to all healthcare workers in all hospitals, nursing homes, adult care facilities, health agencies, hospices, etc. Governor Hochul signed this back on August 16th. Deadline to become fully vaccinated for hospital employees was today, September 27th. October 7th is the deadline for other facilities. And so it's just that slow domino effect. We're going to see it just continue to spread throughout the country, starting in New York. And it's not just the big cities like New York City. This is also affecting small rural hospitals also. Another story from the New York Times we can see here says that a small upstate New York hospital is going to stop delivering babies. 6 workers quit rather than be vaccinated. This was published back on September 13th, updated September 24th. A small hospital in upstate New York planning to suspend delivering babies in just a few weeks because labor shortages. Delivery nurses resigned rather than comply with the state's vaccine mandate. The development underscores the challenges that many healthcare systems face amid national shortage of nursing staff. The math is just not working, said Gerald Kayer, the chief executive officer. Says the number of resignations received leaves us no choice but to pause delivering babies. 6 out of the 18 staff members in the maternity department have left. 7 have not indicated whether they're going to get their shots. So almost the entire staff, Mr. Kayer said. The hospital located in Lowville, the county seat, said he expected to deliver 200 babies this year. But not anymore, because everybody's leaving. 6 of 18 gone. They've already resigned. We're not doing it. And the 7 others, which would add that to a total of 13 out of the 18, kind of on the fence about it. So maybe they're gone too. And it's weird, because, these are healthcare people. They work in the healthcare space. So this isn't your average stereotypical Trump MAGA person that MSNBC likes to dunk on all the time, right? These are medical professionals delivering babies. Presumably they have a good understanding, given their years of training and nursing school and whatever it is they go through, on how to identify risks and make decisions for themselves. But it doesn't matter, because the only thing that matters is bending the knee. It's about compliance, not about healthcare or safety. An entire hospital ward, maternity ward, is about to be decimated because of this. And so I've been thinking a lot about these vaccine mandates, and I've been trying to wrap my head around why it makes sense to fight them so well, especially if it's going to sort of theoretically maybe hurt you, right? That's the premise that a lot of the highly pro-vaxxers are talking about, that the vaccine is going to save you. That's why it's so important that you get it. And if you don't, you're going to put yourself at risk. And if you don't, you're going to put society at risk. You are going to be somebody who's out there killing grandma. We've been hearing this for 2 years now. I heard that last year, that if you don't stay home, killing grandma. Don't put the mask on, killing grandma. Want to run your business, killing grandma. Want to kick somebody out of your property, killing grandma. And around we go. Now, even though grandma is vaxxed, if you don't get vaxxed for some reason, you're killing grandma. Everything you do is going to kill grandma indefinitely. And there's a huge portion of this country that is going to continue to think about it that way. Are clapping like seals for these vaccine mandates, even as they're wrecking their own healthcare system that they're relying on. Bunch of New Yorkers, yeah, get them out of here. Okay, well, that's the end of your hospital system. You're going to have a bunch of soldiers in there now taking your temperature. So does that make you feel better? Does that make you feel safe? Okay, hope so. So I've been trying to think about why specifically, how you can tease this out. Are there any other things in life where we say that we are going to harm the government? We are going to punish the government because they are encroaching on our liberties. Yeah, there is. It's in criminal law. It's called the Exclusionary Rule. And I put a whole thread together about it over on Twitter because I basically have only a handful of followers on Twitter. I want to read through it with you right now. Let's take a quick look on what was happening here. Cough break. All right, so you can see here my first tweet says, "We fight a dishonest system that cloaks its mendacity in authority and science. Fighting vaccine mandates is necessary to preserve liberty." It's necessary. We cannot allow it to stand. Here's how I justify that. Number one, we have to go through and sort of analyze this in an equation format. I said the government has a total monopoly on power. Society accepts this as part of a bargain. We enter into a social contract that acts as a foundation for life. The governed, that's us, via their consent, grant the government authority, total authority, with the belief that doing so is going to promote freedom and well-being. But this grant comes with an explicit understanding that the government will use its total power responsibly. Having fled an irresponsible government, the founders were so concerned about creeping tyranny that they codified responsible power in the Constitution and the United States. They were right to be concerned, as our era of COVID pandemic pandemonium has led many bureaucrats to behave irresponsibly in direct violation of their oaths. When the government does not act responsibly and encroaches on established civil liberties, it becomes necessary for the citizenry, that's us, to respond to enforce the strict limitations previously established and agreed upon. When the government unlawfully extends its power, they breach not only their contract with the people, but they also violate the natural rights of mankind upon which the contract is founded. When a contract is breached, the disputing parties identify their points of leverage in order to gain favor in the conflict. With COVID, under the guise of public health, the government breached that contract, and they started to use its leverage aggressively to gobble up power. Mandates for masks that have been utilized as political symbols and weapons of compliance. Masks on for the cameras, off for comfort. Lockdown orders that were antithetical to freedom, even for a single day, lasted months. Property rights evaporated month after month as the CDC decided your property was now theirs. Vaccine mandates are now being rolled out using obscure extra-constitutional provisions and executive fiat. The government is now threatening to take your food, your home, and your family by terminating your employment. And if you want to discuss this on the internet, object, question the standard narrative, you are banned, deplatformed, and censored, as I have been. That's leverage. The non-breaching citizens who prefer to adhere to the original contract, where America, the default is liberty, they realize they have no leverage other than non-compliance. Non-compliance, even when doing so, might harm an individual or a society at large, becomes necessary to preserve liberty. This is not a new concept. We punish the government, and by extension, society to some degree, regularly. In criminal law, when the government crosses a constitutional boundary, they lose their case. An unconstitutional interrogation or an unlawful seizure of evidence may result in an actual murderer or a rapist going free. This is not, quote, good for society, but we demand it. Why? Because the punishment, that is the punishment to the government. They crossed a sacred line. The only penalty that matters is their inability to exploit further constitutional violations or to continue with further similar breaches. Today, vaccine mandate noncompliance is the only form of leverage that remains for citizens who have been stripped of everything else. Those who prefer liberty to tyranny will continue to make this calculation and fight against mandates for the greater good in this country and the world. And so that is my synopsis on this thing. Yes, if you don't get the vaccine, you might die. Yeah, it's true. They tell you that, right? You might die if you walk outside and get hit by a bus. You might die if you catch the flu. There's a lot of different things. But how could you be so selfish that you're going to kill yourself, or you're going to take a hospital bed, or you're going to kill grandma? Well, the reason, folks, is because the government has crossed that sacred line. They have done something so reprehensible. They have taken away so much from so many. The only thing left to do is to say we're going to fight the mandates. And so when we talk about these troopers, when we talk about these nurses, they are sacrificing a ton in the name of liberty. A ton. Some people like myself have the benefit, the tremendous privilege of being able to be a little bit self-sustaining. Okay, we started a business. I'm not beholden to any employer. I'm beholden to our clients. I'm beholden to you, the audience. I'm beholden to my morals, my ideals, the things that I have written down and said we're going to focus on. For our business, safety, clarity, and hope. Those are our 3 mission pillars. For this show, accountability, transparency, and justice. Those are our mission pillars. But other people have to be a part of something. It's hard to be a nurse or deliver babies in a maternity ward by yourself. You can't go start a business like that. It's hard to be a police officer by yourself. You can't do that. And these are good people who are part of something that are scared to death because the government is about to take something away from them. And they're making a hard decision to say, yes, I'm going to put myself in harm's way. I am going to stand up and object to this. And the consequences are going to be evident. But while the government continues to force this to happen and continues to wreck our industries across the board, it's very important that we pause, pay our respects to the people who are standing up and fighting against tyranny in the name of liberty. So thank you for allowing me to go through that. Let's jump into some questions if there are any over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Pull this up here, and I see a couple are coming in. All right, so we've got, let's see here. We've got one over from X says, Rob, do you ever pay attention to the comments, the dislikes of any social media posts involving Joe? It's really amusing. The comments never fail to disappoint. I do. I watch those pretty regularly. There's a great website. I wonder if do I have this linked up anywhere? Let's see, YouTube like to dislike ratio. There's a great website that covers this. Of course, it's not showing up on Google. Let's see if I can find this real quick, because this is a very, very interesting thing that's happening over on YouTube. If I can find this real quickly. I can't. I'll post it over on Locals. Yeah, but what's happening on YouTube is they are deleting all of the dislikes off Joe Biden's video, and there's a website that regularly pings the videos and just keeps count. And so it can tell specifically when YouTube goes in there and adjusts it. It's sort of a fake presidency to some degree. Former LEO says, if Biden had any sense of humor, he'd grab his chest and fall over. You know what? I'd give him major props for that. But it wouldn't work very well for him because the rest of the media would not find that funny. We have Nancy Pelosi's fun bags are here. Says, I'm glad that you love these. Oh no, that's just horrible. Nancy Pelosi's fun bags. Sapper Jackson is here, says, ouch. We watch our soldiers leave, police leave, nurses, and Biden is attacking the Border Patrol next. How did this guy get 80 million votes? How have we elected a man who doesn't know what is great about being an American? Attacks government employees for doing the job correctly. The rapture is coming soon, y'all. Hopefully before the one world government or before America is made socialist or communist. I think we're a little past that right now. I think we're sort of right in the middle of a dynamic America where socialism, I think that's kind of out the window. That's been around for a long time. You realize how much taxes you pay, right? It's like 40 to 50% of your income goes to the government and to somebody else, everybody, right? Even, let's say if you make a certain amount of money, you're paying a significant portion of that. You may not necessarily pay that in income tax, but you're paying it in property taxes, sales taxes. Every time you get on a plane, there's a 9/11 tax, Homeland Security tax, hotel taxes, water taxes. You fill up your gas at the gas station, gas taxes, everywhere is taxation. And so, yeah, I mean, if half your stuff is going to the government in some degree, that kind of sounds like kind of communist to me. And it feels like we're going that direction in a hurry. Good to see you, Sapper Jackson. We have another one from Jay He says, Ben Shapiro covered this story, said only 2 out of 16 people from the FDA panel approved the booster. Biden didn't like this, had the CDC director overrule them. Would be nice if the public heard the truth. Totalitarian government is working at its finest. That's from Jay Heath. Yeah, there's been a lot. It's really hard to keep track of this, right? FDA came out and said something. CDC, a different panel, came out and said something. Rochelle Walensky came out and said something different. And so everybody's just kind of concocting whatever they want in order to pass whatever they want. So we've got that. We also have another question here from former LEO. Says, that's on the next segment, so we'll get back to that one. LT13 says, de Blasio says he has 1,000 subs for teachers who don't get vaccinated. The lies he tells. I teach in Virginia, and with quarantining and COVID, teachers are out in mass with no coverage. You can't share classes because of the COVID restrictions. Gonna be a mess, says LT13. I agree with that. You know, a lot of different, I'm seeing this happen around the country, that different courts are saying, oh, if you're a lawyer, you got to get vaxxed if you want to come into our courtroom. Haven't seen that in Arizona yet, but that's some serious business is going to hit the fan. Let's see. Former LEO is asking about Rumble. We are streaming over there. Shifra Lynn says, thank you for this show. I don't normally watch it live, but watch it daily when I get home from work. Hubby has even gotten used to hearing your voice in the background. Just want you to know that you and your crew are amazing. That's from Shifra Lynn. Well, thank you, Shifra. And you know, it's been a little bit of inconsistent show schedule over these last 2 weeks. My voice is coming back. I still got a little bit of damage in there that I think is healing up. But I know what it's like when people that you regularly listen to don't do the show. And I hate it. I'm like, oh, I was going to listen to you right now and you don't have an episode available. Dang it. And so I understand that, and I apologize if I was interrupting some of the standard process in your schedule. So shout out to Shifra Lynn. Shout out to Shifra Lynn's husband. Thanks for being here and thanks for supporting us. We have another question from LT13 says, 11th graders are loving the shortages. Bus driver shortage, Massachusetts students party bus stripper pole. Not going to open that link, LT13, because it sounds spicy. A couple other ones. Former LEO says, when San Francisco PD went on strike, the mayor threatened to bring in the National Guard, except our union got an injunction limiting the use of the National Guard. Strike lasted 4 days and the city caved. Yeah, police, nurses, when the infrastructure starts to crumble, people's priorities might change a little bit. You know, rather than saying, we care about every single person being vaccinated in that one hospital in New York, maybe they say, listen, I have a baby it's coming out like now. I need help delivering this. Give me a vaxxed person, an unvaxxed person. I don't care because I have a baby coming out of my body. And that's more important than whether somebody who may have already had COVID, somebody who is totally asymptomatic, somebody that is not a threat to you or your child, maybe you make that equation. Same thing. What if you are sort of a very intense vaxxer and you're being robbed? Somebody's in your house, you call 911. Do you say, 911, what is your emergency? Somebody's in my house. I don't know who it is. I'm stuck in a closet and they're rummaging around the kitchen. I don't know what to do. Send help. And the 911 caller says, sorry, we only have unvaccinated police officers who are available to come and help you. What? They're unvaxxed? Yeah, they're unvaxxed. Did they even get the first shot? No, they don't want him. They don't want him at all. Do you want the officers or not? Well, not if they're not vaccinated. So I guess I'll just sit here while the burglar continues to ransack my house. Right? No, the priorities change. That person's going to go, I don't care who it is. Send them over. Even if they've got COVID, send them over. Because priorities shift. Right now, a lot of Americans are just used to having everything bubble wrapped for them. Everything is perfect. And so it just makes total sense. Oh, just go get the jab. It's not even, why do you even think about it? Well, that is changing rapidly. The country is deteriorating, and we're going to have to make a decision about that in the near future. A couple other questions before we move on. Lieutenant John Halgren's in the house, says the insanity. We're spending a fortune to fight these idiots in courts. 25 years, and I'll be tossed aside. That's from John Halgren. You know, John Halgren has been somebody who's over on YouTube, and he's been sharing a little bit a part of his struggle and his battle dealing with these similar issues. And he's in the middle of the fight as well. He's fighting it right now. He's in that same category of people that we've spoken about. And John, hopefully I didn't share too much there. We haven't talked about whether I can communicate any of that on the show, but you've been sharing a lot of that with us over at Locals, and I appreciate it, man. I think about you a lot and what you're going through. Randomly, I just, wonder how he's doing, because it is stressful as hell, and I hope you are finding some peace in the middle of all of this. That's from Lieutenant John Halgren. Major shout out to John. We've got a couple other questions. Thunder7 says, They won't be able to replace all the nurses and healthcare workers and all the cops and military. They're irreplaceable unless they go through rigorous training. Can the lunatics forcing vaccine mandates explain how a National Guard can replace an experienced pediatric nurse or an experienced cop or a Navy SEAL who is eligible through expert training, which would kill most people? How about an experienced fire captain? Think it's easy to replace people like this? The Biden Marxists are completely delusional. It's going to end very badly for them. They are wrecking these industries. They have no appreciation for the people who are doing the hard work. None. The only thing that matters to them is whether they bend the knee or not and follow their mandates. And I agree. I think it's going to be problematic. A couple more. Realtor Patty says, my cousin's wife just passed away. They're saying from COVID. She had the COVID shot. That's from Realtor Patty's in the house. Sorry to hear that, Realtor Patty. I hope your family is doing well. We have a couple others before we jump into the next segment. Cats59 is here, says, wonder how many of the National Guard are trained nurses and doctors. As for foreign nurses, we have been using them for years. I still get agencies contacting me at least every month. I've been retired for 2 years. That's from Cats59. Couple more. We've got John Halgren says, nobody cares. Naperville firefighters sue Pritzker over the government vax mandates. Let's pull this story up real quick because John Halgren just sent it. Over here from Newsbreak says a group of firefighters and paramedics in Naperville have joined the ranks of those now suing to challenge the mandates that were put in place throughout the state, following the lead of Governor J.B. Pritzker, requiring a host of workers to get vaccinated, submit to weekly COVID testings, or potentially lose their jobs. That's from Cook County Record, looks like. Let's see what else we have here. Paramedics set in a complaint literally before we had sufficient data to know how susceptible a given individual was to COVID-19 and before we come to an understanding of how dangerous the virus was. Paramedics were the front line in the response to COVID. This is a great article. Thank you for sending this, John. I'm going to read through this, and we're going to be revisiting a lot of this. I appreciate you sending it over. Let's see what else. A few other questions before we jump into the next segment. As I mentioned, it's going to be a little shorter show today, but we've got a couple other here. Chairman says, so there's going to be fewer births due to a labor shortage. That's from Chairman of the Board. I says, I see what you did there. I didn't do that intentionally. I think that they did that, but you caught it. Thank you, Chairman. Good to see you, my friend. Sleepy Joe is here. Can't read that. Talking about Joe's booster. YouTube will ding us, I think, on that medical misinformation. Greg Murat is here. Says, hey, Rob, I think you were talking about the grandma that got pushed to the ground by the police and then got unloaded a can of pepper spray in her face. She was already on the ground. Looks so bad that the police there are now spreading a false rumor she's a 34-year-old man in disguise. The police have taken zero responsibility for this incident, nor was an apology given. There have been several incidents like this during the last week. Let me see if I can pull that up real quick. This is Instagram that is loading. Yeah, and oh, okay. So it looks like this was what they posted over on Instagram. People must have been sent many people have sent us Photoshop claiming this lady was knocked over and sprayed. She was the 34-year-old male. Yeah, doesn't quite look like that. So that's what's happening in Australia. It's really disgusting what I'm seeing over there. A few more. Chairman of the board says, on a more serious note, India is crushing COVID. 16% vaccination rate. They have a government kit with various medicines in it. They've got targeted isolation and testing. Bigger question, why isn't this being investigated? Why isn't this being studied? Good question. Instead, our leaders seem to want to mandate, shame, preach their way out of this, which is clearly not working. How am I supposed to have faith in a vaccine that 70,000 healthcare workers don't want? It's a great question there, Chairman. Great question. I'd be very good to listen to what the CDC has to say about that. Sapper Jackson says, Rob, do you need a water boy? I'll be jobless after I get my dishonorable discharge for not getting vaxxed. Honestly, if we had the resources to offer every single person a job that I would do it. We don't, Sapper Jackson. Dishonorable discharge. Can you believe this crap? It makes my blood boil so badly. Dishonorable discharge? What a joke. Paula MK's here, says, hey, Rob, thanks for keeping the live show today. My religious exemption was denied, so I will lose my hospital job on November 12th unless I get the vaccine. 1/3 of our workers are unvaxxed, hoping that they all stay strong. It's so hard to make the decision between feeding my family and doing what I know is right, but it goes back to making a choice between what is right and what is easy. I'd rather relinquish my job than relinquish my freedom. Lots of fear of what's going to happen, but lots of faith that it's going to be okay. Paula, prayers and thoughts with you. I mean that so genuinely. It makes me sick. It makes me sick that our own government is doing this to people. But I got to tell you, the equation that you just delineated, I'd rather relinquish my job than my freedom. That's such a statement. It moves me. Thank you for being here, Paula. Best of luck. Lots of prayers your way as well. We have another one from Arnie B5. Oh yeah, the YouTube like counter. Maybe somebody linked that up. Let's see if it's not that one. I linked it somewhere. Thank you for sending that over. It wasn't that one. Maybe it got nuked or something. I don't know where it went. We have another one from Radice. Says, one midwife can deliver a healthy mom and baby. I worked a high-risk L&D unit for 25 years as a nurse. I saw the good and the bad. Women smoke, drink, use drugs, don't eat healthy. But it's the hospital's fault if the baby isn't perfect. Yeah, look, I understand a lot of that, Radice. We have similar stuff that happens in the law, right? Everything you can possibly do to win and accomplish your client's goals sometimes isn't enough. And despite your best efforts, people can still be very upset about that. All right, we got one more question here from John Halgren. Says, share away, brother. So that's on the John story. John, you shared me that link, the Naperville link. I'm going to take a look at that. Maybe we'll do a whole segment on that. We'll see. But John, Paula, and many others, lots of prayers going your direction. And that is it on that segment, my friends. Thank you for being a part of the show. Thanks for being a part of watchingthewatchers.locals.com. All right. And so we've got two other segments to fly through, and I got to go dang it. All right. We're not going to fly through the Arizona audit one because this is important stuff. The Arizona audit. I live in Arizona, not here in Arizona now. I happen to be in Arlington, Texas, but I did watch the 3-hour presentation that was delivered on Friday. And I want to go through it, not in a lot of detail, because you can watch the whole thing if you want on YouTube. It's about 3 hours, and it is packed with data, packed with information. We have several different presentations from different people analyzing all different parts of the election. And while there's some good stuff in there, we're going to gloss through it. I want to take a little step back here. I want to go to a higher level and sort of talk about what are we talking about? Because a lot of people take a look at the Arizona audit, and like we talk about here, it's a Rorschach test for many people. If you're on sort of the side that, everything went perfectly according to plan, the most secure election in history, no problems at all, then you're going to look at this like it's a joke. It's run by a company called Cyber Ninjas, and they didn't find anything, and you're going to just sort of jump into that bucket. If you're somebody who takes a look at Joe Biden, you go, how the hell did that guy get 81 million votes when he didn't campaign and he was in a basement for most of the election season? How did that happen? Now, especially considering the way that he's governing. And so you look at it and you go, oh my goodness, there are these huge buckets of votes that mean that this whole thing was illegitimate. And so we got to take a step back and we have to analyze the evidence according to some structure. Because it's easy to just shoot from the hip, but that's not really the right way to analyze these issues. And so we're going to apply some of the same lessons that we learn in law that we're all sort of familiar with. We know the different standards in the law. We know what probable cause kind of sounds like, what that means. We kind of know what it feels like. We know what reasonable suspicion kind of means. We know what you need to show a judge before they can issue a warrant, right? They can't just come into your house. They have to prove evidence to a certain degree before a judge will sign off on it and then approve them to break into your home. Your home is a sacred ground. It's sacred space. So what evidence does the government have to show in order to breach that? It's called a standard, the burden of proof. So we're going to go through that in a little bit. Before we do, of course, the standard disclaimer, Joe Biden is the president. He's in the White House. He's the guy making these awful decisions. And so nothing that we're going to talk about here is going to change that fact. Even if you are a person who's in the category saying that specifically that everything was improper, that is your opinion, may be true. But as a consequence of that opinion, what happens next? Does the election change? Does Arizona get decertified? Does the whole thing reverse? Does Donald Trump get thrown back into office? No, as far as I can tell. There are a couple different stories out there that are hypothesizing about what this could mean and how this could unravel and undo everything. And I don't buy any of it. We've gone through this enough on this channel. We're not going to rehash it here. But what happens when you have a situation like this is there are a couple ways that you can call for a new election, essentially. And it is such a high burden, I find it to be very, very unlikely. A constitutional amendment to change the election or a convention of the states or something extremely dramatic that would never happen, in my opinion, by 2024 anyways. So we have to just take a step back and recognize, for YouTube purposes especially, Joe Biden is the president. He's in the White House, and that's what happened. So as a result of that baseline, we know that that exists. The next question we have to ask ourselves are sort of, so what? What is this audit for? Why did we do this? Why does this matter? Why is it important? What are we trying to answer? And how are we going to answer that? So here's a couple questions that came to my mind. Number one, big question about the Arizona audit. Are the current Arizona results valid? Yes or no? That would confirm that Joe Biden won. It's a big question. Are they valid? If yes, done. End of story. Are they invalid? Does that mean that someone other than Joe Biden won? The current results say Joe Biden won. If the results show something different, well, then the current results are invalid. Doesn't necessarily mean Trump won. Doesn't necessarily mean Joe Biden won. Or we can confirm that Joe Biden didn't win. But it doesn't necessarily mean that Trump won. Third question. Are the current results in question? Meaning we can't answer either one of those two questions. We can't decide whether it's valid that Joe Biden won. We can't decide whether it's invalid, whether somebody else won. Why? Because the results are in question. It's bad data. We can't tell who won. There are disagreements about the data. And this is kind of where we're living right now. A lot of people are taking a look at this and saying, this is looking pretty bad. But what does that mean? Just because the data is bad and you can't tell doesn't mean that Joe Biden didn't win. It's a different issue. Just because the data is bad doesn't mean that Trump won. Just means you can't really tell. And maybe there are some problems and maybe there is some room for improvement in the next election that need to be fixed so that we can verify this. A lot of this stuff is very similar to what we do in criminal law. In a DUI case, I'm here in Arlington. I've been studying DUI science for the last 3 days. Today, tomorrow, and Wednesday, we're going to be doing the application. So we went to the crime lab. We looked at a ton of really complicated stuff that I'm going to share with you in the next segment. But that also has to be applied to something. We have to do something with that data. And sometimes the data is subject to interpretation. Prosecutor interprets it one way. They say we followed the science. We tested the blood appropriately. Sometimes a defense attorney and another expert witness can take a look at the same data from the same blood sample and come up with an entirely different conclusion. How is that possible? Well, it's because we're talking about complex things and interpretation, right? Everybody wants to come out and say science. Science, science, science. It just is what it is because science proved it. That's not really how science works. If you actually know how it works, right? We're talking about scientific method. We're coming up with hypotheses and we're testing it. And we have to ask ourselves, in the case of the Arizona audit, what are we asking? What are we testing? And how are we showing and proving that evidence? Okay. So the fourth question, what is the standard of proof? What do they have to prove? We're going to look at a chart in the next slide. And then lastly, who has the burden of proof? So now we have to ask ourselves, what are we trying to prove? To what level? To what standard? And who has the burden of meeting that standard? So the big obvious question, well, we want to know who won? Arizona. That's the big question. So now we have to ask ourselves, at what level? What is the burden here? This is a standard burden of proof chart that defense lawyers use all the time in criminal cases. And I want to run you through this scale briefly. All right, so what you see here is at the very, very, very top, you see a standard that we're all very familiar with. It's called beyond a reasonable doubt. This is the reasonable doubt stair in this diagram of stairs. But we can start at the bottom. And you can see here, if the government presents no evidence in a case, let's say, for example, somebody's been charged with a DUI. The government presents no evidence. That's because there's no trace of any evidence whatsoever. What do you get in that case? Obvious. You get a not guilty. Now, you work yourself up these different standards, these different levels of proof. We have a scintilla of evidence. That means that any evidence at all, even the smallest measurable amount of evidence, is what's considered a scintilla of evidence. We also have another standard called reasonable suspicion. You're very familiar with this one. This is the standard that the police need to do. They need to meet this standard before they can pull you over. They can't just, if you're just leaving a restaurant, they can't say, well, I think that maybe, I speculate that maybe that person had some beer, and so I'm going to pull that person over. That's not enough for reasonable suspicion. That doesn't count. You need to have something that is based on specific or particular facts or reasons, not based on a hunch or a guess. And so that's the standard in order to pull you over. If an officer says, well, you're kind of weaving within a line, or you're speeding, okay, now I have something that's particular. Going over the speed limit. You were weaving. You made a wide right turn. Okay, reasonable suspicion. Now I can seize your liberty. You see how these go up. I can pull you over and stop you in order to investigate the case further. We also have probable cause, which is a very important standard here. This is reasonable and trustworthy information that a particular person has committed a particular crime. This is the standard that you'll see for government warrants, for arrests. If a police officer is going to take you out of your home or get a warrant to go and search your home, probable cause. There's a very sacred liberty there. And so we say that the government, before they take that away from you, they've got to meet this standard. We protect the sanctity of your home to such a degree that they have to have probable cause to a judge before they take that away from you. We also have another standard called preponderance of the evidence, the greater weight of the evidence. And so if you're charged with a crime and the only thing the government has is probable cause that you committed it, or preponderance of the evidence, it's not enough. You're going to get not guilties on those all days. Now, we have clear and convincing evidence, another high standard, a firm belief that the allegations are true. And this is the type of stuff that you'll see in child custody cases. Okay, before you can be stripped of your child, they've got to have some pretty clear and convincing evidence. Not beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a high criminal standard, but pretty clear. And then the last one, of course, is reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt. Before we're going to take a person and send them to prison, we're going to say the government has to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. If there's any doubt that's based in reason, well, I don't know if that blood sample was tested appropriately. I don't know if the gas chromatography machine was calibrated properly. I don't know if the lab was doing proper method validations. We don't know. And if there's any doubt that's based in reason, not guilty. The government has that burden. They've got to prove it. And so one of the first questions that we can ask ourselves is, what is the standard in elections? What does the government, if you want to take this tact, what level does the government have to prove to show that the election was appropriate? What do we show here if we're going to change this guilty to, let's say, a valid election? It's not guilty now, it's valid. Does the government have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt that the election was valid? Which is a pretty high standard. If there's any doubt that's based in reason that the election wasn't appropriate, wasn't conducted appropriately, what do we do? Or is it a much lower standard? Let's say, is it the reasonable suspicion standard? Sort of, if we have enough here to say it was fine, that it's based on specific and particular facts, it's not based on a hunch. We kind of went through everything. We checked everything. It's pretty reasonable that this is all good. Was that valid? Or should it be held to a higher standard? You've got your kids are taken away at clear and convincing. You can be stripped out of your home at preponderance, at probable cause. You can be pulled over in your car for reasonable suspicion. Those are the different standards. The government has to meet that. So the question is, What about in elections? Just because they did it, do they have to prove anything? Or is this something that the burden should be shifted to the people challenging the election? In DUI cases, it often works that way, where the government will say, if you're over a certain limit, we can presume that you're impaired. And if you want to challenge that blood alcohol content, the defense now has the burden to prove that, to rebut that presumption. So in this case, right, if you're somebody who wants to default to say that an election that is run according to their policies and procedures, as long as it was done according to those policies and procedures, it's valid. And so we can say that all of these would be satiating the final result, and it would be up to the defense, or it would be up to the people challenging the election to prove this stuff. So you have to kind of pick which bucket you're in. Does the government have to prove that the election was conducted appropriately beyond a reasonable doubt? They have to shatter any doubt that is based in reason. Or is the fact that they just finished it enough? Their job's done. And so that anybody who's challenging this now, maybe they have to meet a certain standard. They've got to show, oh no, this was something that beyond a reasonable doubt, we can show you was not legitimate. So we're talking about two different sides of attacking this. And of course, the standards are very high. I happen to be somebody that thinks elections are pretty sacred and that they should be held to a very high standard. Just because you have a bunch of people that say that they ran it well, not quite good enough for me. Why do I believe that? Because I know what government work looks like. I know what the crime lab people do. I know what police officers do. I know how it works when the government says everything's fine. Guess what? It's not. It never is. So here in this case, what do we do with the audit? Is it something that we measure to one of these standards? You're going to have to pick that standard. I can't give that to you. It's not very well defined. There are some case law that will tell you about, when stuff is reversed and things like that. But this is outside of that scope. This is the Arizona audit. Let's go through some of the data that came out in the audit, and you can decide where this should fall on the burden of proof standard. So a couple things that we saw come out of the audit. Here is a presentation from Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. And we have heard a lot from this guy on prior shows. We talked a lot about this. Dr. Ayyadurai has been focused on a lot of the election litigation for a long time. Recall that right after the November 3rd election, we talked a lot about all the various lawsuits that were flying around until YouTube decided you can't really talk about that stuff anymore. But here he came out, he made a presentation, and he said that there are some pretty serious issues. Signature verification process is actually unverifiable. Lack of systems integration in reporting led to duplicates. Said they're very opaque, very non-transparent standard operating procedures. So if that's the case, how can you validate what was actually done? If they're not following standard operating procedures, if I'm testing, if I'm in a crime lab and the blood analyst is not following the procedure for testing the blood, that blood sample, that analysis is invalid. It's not applicable anymore. So they follow the rules very clearly, very closely. That's why we go through and make sure that they did what they said they were going to do. And we interview them, and guess what? It's not always the exact SOP. So same thing here. If the government is not telling us how they're doing things, is that enough to create some reasonable doubt or to identify some areas where maybe the standard is failing to the point where it should invalidate the final result? You have to decide sort of where to measure the evidence, how to measure it against that scale. So some other findings we saw in a different presentation, that they are saying that as many as 5,000 individuals may have voted in more than one county. About 400 voters had incomplete names. A couple hundred people registered after October 15th cutoff. Another 2,800 shared a number with another voter at some point. And so what does all that mean? All of these hundreds of people who are voting to some degree, does that impact the sanctity of the election? And if so, does it introduce some doubt? To what degree? What level of certainty? Working your way up that scale does 6,000, 7,000 votes. Where does it fall? We also have some serious cybersecurity issues. They failed to perform basic operating system patch management. They failed to update antivirus definitions. Certification defense is not valid in view of the evidence. They had 4 executable files that were created after Dominion installed software. Another 45 of those executables, which are software programs, are modified after the software install. 377 DLL files, those are dynamic library files, I believe, that were created after the software install. Very important files. Another 10,000 were modified. They failed to secure and preserve security logs. They shared accounts and common passwords. They failed to establish and monitor host baselines and other network communications. Is that consequential? Does that lead you to doubt the validity of the election? Does that introduce reasonable doubt if you want to use that standard? If you want to go from the other end, is this a scintilla of evidence that maybe the election was invalid? Would this be enough to meet the probable cause standard that maybe there's a problem here? Would a police officer be able to go and get a warrant to investigate some of this stuff if you were being charged with a crime? Maybe. Who knows? They also are talking about file deletions. 9,500 directories and 1.1 million election-related files were deleted, according to them, between November 1st and March 16th. Why would they need to delete all those files? Is it just routine deletions? I don't know. Does this introduce doubt, any reasonable doubt here about the validity of the election? Or if you don't think that it should, why? We have, I think, 2 more examples. We see here EMS listening ports. Analysis discovered 59 ports that were open. There was unexpected high port listening by standard Windows processes. We've got IPv6 enabled, terminal services enabled, remote access is enabled. Is that enough to meet that reasonable doubt standard? And we have a final conclusion about possible ineligible voters. Audit identified numerous questions regarding ineligible voters, and a further investigation is necessary to determine whether they were allowed to vote. And so we go back to our standard here. Where do we fall? Is there clear and convincing evidence that this election was legitimate? Or asked the opposite way, is there clear and convincing evidence that the election was fraudulent? It's a high standard for both. Right? If you're somebody who thinks that the cyber ninjas should show that there was reasonable doubt about this, it's a pretty high standard, right? For the government to rebut. And our questions, once again, were these. Are the current results valid? Are the current results invalid? Or are they in question? Let's see what you have to say about this over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We've got some questions here. Let's see. First one is from Jerry Nadler. It says Antifa is a myth. Says these findings should be easy to figure out if they are legitimate. Maricopa's explanation for the findings could be legit, but they shouldn't be trusted based on how hard they've obstructed. That's from Jerry. Antifa is a myth. Nadler. Jerry Nadler. Jerry's. Don't we have Jerry's Belly somewhere? Yeah. Three Girlies is here. Oh, that was on the last segment. Let's see what this one says. You know, the National Guard have trained nurses and doctors, but generally they're in hospitals already working as civilian doctors or nurses. So they're going to take a doctor or nurse from a National Guard, activate them to do the work they're already doing. It's like shaving off the top end of a blanket and sewing it on the bottom and saying it's a whole new blanket. Complete insanity. Good to see you, Three Girlies. Hope you're feeling well. We have former LEO says, maybe he, she, it identifies as a 34-year-old male. Those are on the last segment. Let's see what else. We've got Greg Harris is here. Says, why are none of the audit details discussed on the mainstream media? If the effort was a failure, I'd expect it to be torn apart Is it okay to say the election was invalid because of sloppy enforcement of the rules, not because they were trying to favor one candidate over the other? I'm confused. What is the reason for the censorship? Well, they just don't want to talk about it. They're happy with the result. They don't want anything to change. They won in all the different states. They changed all the rules leading up to the election. We covered all of that here. They did it legitimately in the court of law. Mark Elias, Democracy Docket. They went hog wild in the courts, and the judges bent over backwards to accommodate because a bunch of the feckless judges were very concerned about COVID. And everything needed to change so that grandma would not die at the voting booth, apparently. Sapper Jackson says, oof, I would like for elections to be held tighter than top secret packets in the military. Sadly, political bias will always interject. Yeah, and so you can sort of see, like, the Republicans, generally speaking, want to increase the sanctity of the elections, voter ID, proof that you are who you are, all of those things, so that there's a higher standard that's being met. The Democrats largely, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, they tell you that, if you happen to be African American, it's really hard for you to find a copy machine. It's really hard for you, according to Joe Biden, to get on the internet because they are the most racist people ever. All right, we have Arnie B5 says, oh yeah, I think this is it. Arnie B5 sent me this one. This is on the last, this is it. Boom, Arnie B5, money, thank you. Shared this. This is what what YouTube is doing to the White House YouTube channel. So you can see here, let's zoom on in here. Jen Psaki gave a press briefing today, has 2,000 views, which is embarrassing. The official approval rate, oh wait, hold on. All right, the official approval rate is, they're not. Okay, so the older videos are being adjusted. So watch this, yeah. We go down here to, for example, the press briefing. September 24th, official approval rate is 16%. The real approval rate is 8%. So they basically adjusted it by half. So there were 1,000 downvotes that are being reported, and there were actually 2,000 downvotes that were recorded, that were pinged by this website. 179% on that one. This one's got over 200%. So Vice President Harris meets with the President, Republic of Ghana. 3,000 downvotes. They deleted about 2,300 of those. The likes stayed the same. They didn't adjust the likes. 193 likes on both of those. They just deleted 2,300 votes, downvotes, to manipulate it. Same over here, 84%. And the list goes on and on. That's the website. It's 81m.org. 81million.org. That's for Joe Biden. Thank you for that. That's from Arnie B5. Appreciate it. That's exactly the one I was looking for. So I will bookmark that. A few other questions here. Okay, let's see what else we have. Former LEO says, it used to be beyond a reasonable doubt and to a moral certainty. Don't know when that changed. Would the election have to meet the higher criminal standard or the civil standards? Well, some of this matters sort of in the court of public opinion. What do you think? Right? There's really no way to analyze all of this. What do you think it should be? I think it should be pretty dang high, but I think a lot of people don't. Speech Unleashed is here, says, one thing I'm hoping that comes from these audits is the result that AZ residents will demand stricter rules and regulations going forward. Additionally, hopefully, it's going to encourage people to vote for Dems, get them out of power come the next election. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. Good to see you, Speech. Last one on this one says that from Suburban Squid says they found over 17,000 duplicate ballots, which were counted. Biden won the state of Arizona by 11,000 votes. It seems clear to me this should be enough to alarm voters of all parties. Not to mention the approved and validated stamps was magically and amazingly jumped behind the original. On many ballots, slides are about 49 minutes into the audit. Though I voted for Trump, I watched the entire audit, hoping to hear that nothing spectacularly nefarious happened. After 3 hours of cold, hard proof of election effery, it's absolutely maddening. Yeah, I'd encourage everybody to go watch that. There was a lot of very good data in there. My one criticism of the entire presentation was that they didn't have somebody who sort of tied it all together as well as I would have liked. So we talk about this a lot in law, that you can talk about the nuts and bolts of all of this stuff Like, for example, I could go into a DUI trial and have a jury, and I could say to the criminalist, the person who did the blood analysis, I could go after him and talk about all the science. Oh, so you used a gas chromatography machine. That's correct, right? And you've got a pipette, and you've got to take the blood sample out of your the original draw vial. You've got to put that into a headspace vial. You've got to use a pipette. You've got to draw a sample out. You've got to mix that with an internal standard. You have an auto diluter that does that for you. It puts it in there. Then you've got to put it into the headspace vial, right? Yeah. And then you got to crimp it, right? Yeah. And then you've got to make sure that when you put it into the auto sampler, that the needle that comes down and punctures the headspace vial, that only takes the headspace out of the headspace vial and shoves it through the GC machine. And you've got to make sure that all that's working right? Yeah. And you've also got to make sure that when the chromatograms are printed out of the machine, that the baseline level is low enough that we can see some additional noise so we can identify contaminants. And all, right? Yes. Right. And on and on and on. Guess what happens? The jurors just glaze over, just like you did right there. What the hell is he talking about? Right? It's like a foreign language. And so if you try that technique in a jury trial, the jury's just you're going to lose them immediately, because it's not about the science or the data or the details. It's about the story, and it's about identifying the villain, and it's about talking about the betrayal that happened. Who made the betrayal here? Who was the villain? Who was the person who sort of stole this? And there wasn't much of that. There wasn't anybody who was sort of the overarching thematic lawyer, right? Somebody who gave an opening argument. They just kind of jumped right in. Dr. Shiva presented, Cyber Ninjas presented, and they went all through the whole thing. But the story that should have been, so the theme should have been betrayal, dishonesty, or human error, or good enough for government work. Lots of different themes in there, and we didn't see much of that. We just saw a ton of data, and it's easy for people to sort of, gloss over there. And so those were great questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. I want to make sure we take a look at some super chats over here. A couple of those came in. Jennifer submitted one, says the Constitution is not an instrument for the government to restrain the people. It's an instrument for the people to restrain the government. That is from P. Henry. Thank you for that, Jennifer. Ryan Alexander with the super chat says, welcome to Dallas, Rob. Come watch the game at my house. That's the Dallas game. We're actually going to go over there for a little bit. We've got Jumpin' Jeff says, here is your step back. Summer 2023, Biden announces that Trump was actually duly elected. Trump is not allowed to run again. 22nd Amendment. So the idea being that Trump actually won in 2020, and since he won, he can't run again because he was technically the president the last time around. A couple others from locals. I got to finish the last segment. Let's see. Monster One says, I've always been in the opinion that even if they found 10 million fraudulent ballots, nothing would happen. The Republicans are spineless. Couldn't agree with you more. The Republicans are useless. They didn't want Trump to win anyways. He was embarrassing them badly. Arnie says, one bad thing about recommendations provided after the audit, there are already laws that mandate most of it. Right. And so it's the same thing with the crime lab, right? Why did you have the rules in place? Why didn't you follow those? Well, because it's inconvenient. Well, you know what the penalty is? Your results are invalid. How is that any different than here? That was from Arnie B5. We have a couple more. Jeremy says, hey, Rob, many people don't realize all DNS traffic on the internet is routed through a handful of servers around the world, which is why the real numbers can be tracked. According to the audit recommendations, they need to give everyone their own usernames, so there is accountability. Thank you, Jeremy. And last one on this is from Chairman of the Board, says, I watched a good portion of the hearing. It's borderline criminal that the mainstream media is reporting this as it confirmed the Biden win, and there's nothing to see. They act if it's egg on the face of those who question but totally ignore all the questions that were raised. I found especially interesting some of the absentee ballots had the signature behind the parts of the pre-printed form as if they were done with Photoshop. How does that happen? It's a good question, Chairman. Probably when you're printing a bunch of ballots out, huh? All right, those were great. Over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. I've got one more segment because our bus is leaving in 15 minutes. So let's fly through this, shall we, before we get out of here. Let's see. Okay. The FBI came out and just announced that Murder rates, homicides are up 30% this year, which is not too good news. FBI came out and issued a uniform crime report for 2020. It was published on Monday, showing that homicides increased 30% last year from 2019. Data marks the first time in 4 years that the estimated number of violent crimes has increased from the previous year, which is interesting. It's like the first time in 4 years, huh? What happened the last 4 years? Oh, yeah, there was a different president. And suddenly things changed pretty dramatically. Now, this all was happening in 2020. We all sort of know why a lot of this was happening in 2020. We had George Floyd. We had election year. We had everybody melting down about defund the police. And I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I started this channel being extra hard on the police. And then suddenly the justice movement turned into like a psycho movement where everything became about defund the police. And now every single cop, anytime that they pulled somebody over, it's because they were a racist, patriarchal white male for some reason. And that's just not the reality. That has not been my experience practicing law. I talk about it a lot, but one of the biggest gifts that I ever got in my life was from a police officer. And I tell that story in my law enforcement interaction training. But it is something that, you know, the dynamic changed dramatically in 2020, and it happened, it's changed dramatically even beyond that. So violent crime increased by 5% from 2019 to 2020. In 2020, there was an estimated 1.2 million violent crimes. When compared with 2019, robbery offenses fell 9.3%. Volume of rape decreased another 12%. We see here, this is from the FBI. They released their 2020 crime statistics. You can see violent crimes up 5.6% from 2019. We've got violent crime, 387 offenses per 100,000 inhabitants. Property crime, about 2,000 per 100,000. Violent crime rate rose 5.2% compared with 2019, and property crime declined actually. All of these were presented by the FBI in Crime in the United States through the FBI's Uniform Reporting Program. And so, you know, one of the most obvious questions is, all right, well, is this something that is going to continue in this trend? Looks like in 2019, it was a certain number. 2020 was a different number. And the entire law enforcement apparatus seems like it's changing right in front of us. In the first segment on the show today, we talked about several dozen Massachusetts police officers who have already resigned. Nurses are resigning. We've played videos on this show about firemen resigning and challenging that. We've got people who are part of this community who are in the thick of it, fighting this stuff every which way. And so how are the crime rates going to improve if 24 Massachusetts police officers are now gone because of these vaccine mandates? It's not going to, if you had to guess, trend in the right direction. We have some more data here. They analyzed 18,600 different criminal charges. In 2020, 1.2 million violent crimes. Nationwide, 6.4 million property crimes. Victims of property crimes suffered $17.5 billion losses in 2020. The FBI estimated that law enforcement agencies made 7.6 million arrests, excluding those from traffic violations. The arrest rate for violent crime went up. Violent crime offenses, we've got murder, non-negligent manslaughter, 3.8 out of 100,000. Burglary, motor vehicle theft, arrest rate for arson, 3 per 100,000. 2020, those numbers continued to change. And so I want to show you a little bit about, speaking of crime rates and crime labs, as I mentioned, I'm here in Arlington. And over the last 3 days, we spent a lot of time in a chem lab over at the University of Texas in Arlington. And so I want to show you some of that. Now, this first photograph, don't be careful here. Okay, I'm about to show you some stuff that is taking place that was exclusive for criminal defense lawyers. So if you're a prosecutor here, if you're a law enforcement officer, if you're still somebody who's working on arresting people, you're not allowed to watch this, okay? Get out of here, because we're going behind the scenes. Now, before we get there, remember, I'm a lawyer. I'm not a doctor, but I think I have as much qualifications as a lot of other people in the media, given this photograph that you can see here. Obviously, I'm highly sophisticated. I have a lab coat, and I'm standing in front of a science building, which means, folks, I can now answer any questions about COVID, vaccines, because I have a lab coat on. And, as is obvious, I am studying the science. It's pretty good. Pretty good. I think that a lot of the other fake doctors that are out there all over the media, we're kind of on the same levels now. All right, so we've got that. Now I want to show you around. This is a picture from inside the lab. You can see this is a university lab, but you know the crime labs that you'll see throughout the country, you know, look kind of similar to this. Very different machines, a lot of different tubes, stuff running all over the place. Somebody built a computer down here. This is my business partner over here. This is Ryan. He is he came on this. We came on this together. We're going to take a look at some of the different machines that we were poking around with. This is what's called a gas chromatography machine. And this is, you can see here, these are the vials that they will actually test. So the way this thing works is somebody's blood will come in, you know, the blood will be impounded in Arizona. It's in 2 vials, and they seal those with security seals, and then they put your name and label those. Then what happens, once those make it into the crime lab, they get put in the refrigerator, they get pulled out, and they have to be tested. What many people don't recognize is that they're not actually testing the blood. They'll take the blood, they'll put it in one of these, it's called a headspace vial. And what happens is the blood will go down, sort of, they mix it with an internal standard to help with the testing, and they heat that vial up. So the alcohol that's within the blood sample actually goes up into the headspace. It becomes a gas because alcohol can evaporate. They're not testing the blood, they're testing the ratio of the alcohol in the air above the blood. So what happens is in this machine, they prepare a bunch of samples in a very complicated process. Your blood, an internal standard, go into these vials. And what happens is this machine up here has a crane on it. And this crane sort of moves around. It's a robot. And this red thing here is going to pick up the headspace vial. It's going to put it in this little agitator. This red box over here is an agitator that will heat the sample. And then you can see this is the needle in this arm that will actually go right down, puncture the headspace vial, and then it will suck out the air. Then once it does that, it's going to do what's called separation of the air, of that headspace gas. And the way that this works, it's very, very interesting. But the way that it works is they put it through this machine, same machine, and when you open this machine up, it's a giant oven. This is actually not all that giant, but you can see these 2 coils here. These are both what are called columns. They look like sort of bundled up circles of cords, and it's really, really tiny. What that is, it's sort of like a pipe, but it's about the size of a hair, and it's like one hair just looped around and around and around and around and around. What happens is it pulls that gas out of the headspace vial and it injects it into that column. And so the way that this works from a high level, think about sort of a big tube, a big hose that has a bunch of stuff that you want to put into it. The way that I analogize this is I'll say you're putting Skittles in there, you're putting Starburst in there, you're putting Jolly Ranchers in there, and you put them all into this big tube and you want to flush them through this tube, and around and around and around they go. Hundreds and thousands of times. And so what that process does is it separates the Skittles from the Jolly Ranchers from the Starburst. Why? Because as it's going through the tube, different molecules, in this case Skittles and Starburst, they're going to stick to the wall to some degree, and they're going to come out the other end of the tube at different times. And so if you know how long it takes ethanol, for example, to go through the tube and you measure it coming out the other end, then you can sort of guesstimate that whatever comes out the other end at 3 minutes is going to be ethanol. So when they put your blood sample in this machine, they don't actually really know what's coming out the other end of it. They presume, because they've tested this, that they've run enough alcohol samples through. They know at 3 minutes, once it goes in the front end, 3 minutes later, alcohol comes out the other end. So when they test your sample and 3 minutes later, something comes out, they say, oh, that's alcohol. And they measure how much of that alcohol was in there. And so it's very, very interesting to see all of this in action. I've read about this, a million different times, but I've never actually got to go see it, open it, and look around in it. And that's what it looks like. It's actually even smaller than I was expecting. I knew it was going to be small, but it's really, really amazing how detailed it is. This is a different machine. This is called a liquid chromatography mass spectrometer, and this is a triple quadrupole. And so what happens here, much more complicated process, but you still see these same sort of tubes that are connecting. The separation takes place in this separate machine over here, which is the chromatograph, and then it goes over here for analysis. The LC machine is a machine that can actually show you what is in it. So with the GC, the gas chromatography machine, we just say that whatever comes out the other end is alcohol. This one will tell you what it is. This is a different machine that can test drugs and methamphetamines and will really tell you what it is. Very complicated stuff. You can see here is myself with a LC machine doing some very hard science. As you can see, I just picked up that notepad and put some glasses on. That's about the extent of what I was doing there. Over here, you can take a look at this. I'm looking at an actual chromatogram. We were able to prepare some samples and then do some analysis on the samples. And so we did that, and it was just a ton of fun. But that's what I've been doing all day today. We've done a lot more of the application. So we've been taking all this science and practicing with PhD students who came into, they're at the hotel, and so they get they're PhD students who work in these labs, and we get to sort of practice our cross-examinations with them. And so it's been a ton of fun, but since we're talking about crime today, I thought it might be appropriate. Let's take a quick look at some of the questions, because I got to get going. Zulu is here, says, can you go through how the DUI conference is? Like, there are things you learn you didn't know in terms of how cops stake out or look for offenders. Yeah, Zulu, I can definitely do a lot on the crime lab. I've got a lot of slides. I've got like 30 pages of notes. So I'm going to be doing a ton of content on everything we learned. Not as much of it on this channel, but definitely on the R&R Law Group channel. Speech is here, says, crime will continue to increase as more illegals are let in. The U.S. is without the necessary acclimation that normally occurs when you go through the legal channels, not to mention that the illegal drugs coming freely over the border. However, higher crime equals an excuse for government control and intervention. So the Dems couldn't be happier. Yeah, and I think it's happening in different ways. We've got Eat on Test. So thank you for that. Flying through. Eat on Test says, follow the Rob because Rob equals science. I had a lab coat on, and I was standing outside of a science building. So basically, I've got it all. We've got another couple here. Realtor Patty says, have fun at the game. I was at the Dallas Cowboy Stadium 3 years ago. Company had their conference there. Owner of the company is Warren Buffett. He's best friends with the owner of Dallas Cowboys. We were invited to the stadium, got access to the stadium. Cowboy cheerleaders and football players and the mascot. It was fun. Yeah, I'm not a big football fan in general. Like, I'd have a hard time naming a football athlete, literally. But I am interested in giant stadiums. I like big buildings, and I like seeing what human beings are able to create. And so I'm going to have fun with that. We've got a couple more. Osak says, hey, Rob, log in for the show. Had a question about the audit. You talk about the audit like it was a trial. So would the routers that were not turned over fall under the Brady Act? It's a good question. We can spend more time on the audit tomorrow, but I got to get going. We've got Thunder7 says, you have more credibility as a logical mind with a PhD in common sense following the science than the entire corrupt CDC and the NIH ran by the lying Fauci. I mean, I have a lab coat. He has a lab coat. I also don't claim to be an expert on all the science. He does, but our results are kind of the same. Well, at least my results haven't been changing every 2 months. We have another one from Monster One. Hey, it turns out if you demonize the police and encourage this behavior, people are going to leave. In my opinion, this is all by design. Democrats are never going to admit fault. They're already shifting blames to guns. Everyone needs to find out who the Republicans are and vote them out, especially on the red flag laws. The red flag laws infringing on the Second Amendment rights. Agree with you on that. Republicans are basically useless. Monster One says the Cards are undefeated. We have another one from Jeremy says, Rob, you have a law degree, which means you can not only argue in the court of law, but also in the laws of nature. Ooh, I like that. We got Soul Viking says, anyone with a lab coat is automatically a doctor now in a hospital or clinic in the patient's eyes. And our last one here from Dr. Fauci says, I challenge you to a rap battle. I would take that, right? I take that, Dr. Fauci. All right, my friends, that is it for me for the day. I have 1 minute until the bus leaves, so I've got to leave it there. I'm going to go downstairs and I'm going to go check some of this stuff out. I appreciate you being here with me today. Quick reminder, if you're looking to be a part of an amazing community, go over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com, where we have a next meetup Saturday, October 2nd, 2020 from 7 to 8 p.m. All the clips are going to be uploaded to the Clips channel if you want to rewatch any of this, because our Wi-Fi was very bad here today. But I appreciate you being here. We're going to be back doing it all again tomorrow. Not sure on the time because my schedule's a little bit squirrely, but I will see you there. Thank you, my friends, for being a part of the show. Have a tremendous evening. Sleep very well. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.